There is a particular kind of exhaustion that hides behind a compliment nobody would ever think to question. You're so good. You're always there for everyone. I don't know how you do it. You have heard these words so many times they no longer feel like observations. They feel like a job description, one you never remember formally accepting, and one you have grown quietly, unmistakably tired of fulfilling. Why does being called good so rarely feel like relief, and so often feel like pressure? Why does virtue, when practiced long enough without examination, begin to resemble a debt rather than a gift? Before we explore this together, subscribe to this channel where we uncover the hidden psychology behind everyday life. Picture a mask carved into an expression of endless kindness, patient, giving, agreeable in every circumstance, incapable, it seems, of ever causing anyone discomfort. From the outside, this mask is beautiful. People are drawn to it, rely on it, praise it constantly. But masks are worn by faces, and a face held in one expression long enough eventually forgets it was ever capable of anything else. What happens to whatever lives beneath a smile that has never once been allowed to falter? Carl Jung believed that goodness pursued without self-examination is not the same as goodness that has been consciously chosen. The first is simply persona, a performance calibrated for approval. The second requires confronting the shadow, the parts of the self less flattering, less convenient, and integrating them honestly rather than hiding them behind an unbroken record of pleasant behavior. What if the good person, exhausted by their own goodness, has never actually been good in Jung's fuller sense at all, but has simply been performing an image of goodness too rigid to be sustainable? Here is the dark side worth naming plainly: relentless. Unexamined goodness often functions less as generosity and more as a strategy, a way of avoiding conflict, securing approval, and keeping the less acceptable parts of yourself safely out of view. Why would kindness need a strategy behind it at all? Because for many people, being good was never simply a value freely chosen. It was, somewhere early in life, the safest available role, the one most likely to secure love, avoid punishment, or prevent the disappointment of someone whose approval once felt essential to survival. Consider what this often produces over time. Resentment, quietly accumulating beneath every act of accommodation that was never actually offered freely. Anger, suppressed so consistently that it eventually surfaces sideways in passive comments, in unexplained exhaustion, in relationships subtly sabotaged by a person who can never quite say what they actually need. Was that anger always there? Or did the persona of goodness simply teach it to disguise itself so completely that even its owner stopped recognizing it? Alfred Adler believed that many people organize their entire identity around usefulness to others as a way of securing significance proof, offered constantly and anxiously that they deserve to take up space at all. If goodness becomes the primary evidence of your worth, then any deviation from it, any moment of selfishness, anger, or refusal, begins to feel less like a normal human variation and more like a threat to your entire right to exist in other people's lives. Is that truly kindness? Or is it, more precisely, a fragile bargain, dressed up convincingly enough that even the person making it has forgotten its terms? Jung might have said that the good person's shadow contains exactly what the persona has worked so hard to exclude: selfishness, anger, desire, the capacity to disappoint someone without immediately repairing it. And here is the harder question worth sitting with, honestly. What happens to those disowned parts of yourself, denied expression for years at a time? Do they simply vanish, the way the persona would like to believe? Or do they wait, quietly, for a moment, when the mask finally slips, often at the worst possible time, in the worst possible way? This is, in fact, the darker consequence worth naming clearly. A shadow denied for long enough does not stay contained indefinitely. It tends to surface eventually, disproportionately, in outbursts that seem to come from nowhere, in relationships quietly poisoned by resentment, never spoken honestly, in a body that finally, physically, refuses to keep performing a goodness the mind has been forcing it toward for years. Is the sudden collapse of the good person's composure really sudden? Or has it simply been building, unseen, for far longer than anyone, including the person collapsing, ever realized? Picture the tree standing bare through winter, appearing from a distance like something finished without depth. Beneath the surface, unseen, the roots continue their patient widening in the dark. Is recognizing this dark side of your own goodness a betrayal of your values? Or is it simply the visible cost of a root system finally beginning to grow into a fuller, more honest version of the same values you have always held? This is the turn worth making gently here. Acknowledging that your kindness has sometimes served fear rather than love does not mean your kindness was false. It means it was incomplete, practiced without the full self behind it. Performed rather than freely chosen. Jung called this long, uneven process individuation the integration of the shadow into a self capable of choosing goodness deliberately, rather than performing it compulsively out of an old, unexamined fear of disapproval. Individuation, at this stage, rarely feels virtuous while it is happening. It tends to feel, initially, like a kind of falling from grace. Only later does it begin to feel like a far sturdier form of integrity than the mask ever provided. So how do you actually begin integrating this shadow rather than continuing to perform around it? This is where the observer becomes essential, the quiet witness inside you capable of noticing an uncomfortable feeling: anger, selfishness, the desire to simply say no without immediately suppressing it back beneath the mask. Not the part of you that reflexively apologizes for feeling anything less than generous. The part that can simply notice, calmly, I feel something less than kind right now, and this feeling does not disqualify me from being a good person. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that virtue divorced from honesty is a hollow performance, however convincing it may appear from the outside. Can you notice a genuinely selfish impulse rising in you, and observe it honestly, rather than immediately condemning yourself for having it at all? Can you allow your own humanity, including its less flattering corners, to exist without treating its presence as evidence against your character? And here is something worth noticing. If you look honestly, this exhausting performance of goodness has likely repeated itself across many years, many relationships, each one reinforcing the same unspoken rule that your value depends on your continual pleasantness. Why does life seem to place you, again and again, in situations that test whether kindness must remain constant to remain real? Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious in us tends to reappear in our lives as pattern, as recurring exhaustion, until it is finally recognized and consciously addressed, rather than endlessly repeated. Perhaps this is not simply about the specific relationships currently drawing on your endless accommodation. Perhaps it is the newest version of an older question. When did you first learn that being loved required you to be good without exception? And are you finally ready to test whether that belief still holds? Viktor Frankl believed that between what happens to a person and how they respond, a space exists narrow, but entirely their own. You cannot control the expectations others have quietly attached to your kindness over the years. But the space between the automatic performance of goodness and a more honest, sustainable version of it, that space belongs entirely to you. So what does a more honest kindness actually look like in practice? Not something dramatic. Not an abandonment of goodness altogether, but a version of it finally rooted in choice rather than fear. It might look like saying no to a request, even at the risk of temporarily disappointing someone who has come to expect your automatic yes. It might look like admitting, quietly, that you feel resentment towards someone you have spent years accommodating without complaint. It might look like allowing yourself a moment of ordinary selfishness without immediately atoning for it through excessive generosity elsewhere. It might look like offering kindness because you genuinely feel it in the moment, rather than because withholding it feels unbearable. None of this arrives with fanfare. Jung once suggested that people will do almost anything to avoid confronting the less flattering parts of their own character, and if that is true, then simply admitting that your goodness has sometimes been fear, wearing a gentler name, may already be a significant act of courage. Return, for a moment, to the mask, carved so carefully into an expression of endless kindness. Imagine loosening it now, not to reveal cruelty hiding underneath, but simply to let the full range of a real human face finally be seen, capable of anger, capable of refusal, capable of disappointing someone occasionally, and still, underneath all of it, genuinely good. Does that make the goodness less real? Or does it simply mean the goodness, from now on, is finally whole enough to be sustainable? And so we return to the question, beneath this entire performance, beneath every swallowed anger, every automatic accommodation, every moment kindness was offered, not from abundance, but from fear of what withholding it might cost you. What actually remains of your goodness once it no longer requires a flawless, unbroken performance to remain valid? What remains when your worth no longer depends on being endlessly, exhaustingly good to everyone at all times? Jung offered an answer that has outlasted him by nearly a century. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Perhaps the darkest side of being a good person was never the goodness itself. Perhaps it was simply the fear, quietly disguised as virtue, that convinced you your worth depended on never once setting the mask down. If this resonated, subscribe to this channel and join us as we keep uncovering these hidden truths. What is one moment you chose honest kindness over an exhausting performance of it? Write it in the comments below and let that mask, wherever it rests in you, finally be worn only when it's actually true.